So Chris, as you remember, Crying Deer started 9 months ago. The conversation between you and I, when I was talking about Grotowski's technique in theater and the Eastern philosophy of theater, and how artists would find a real connection between himself and his art. I was talking mostly about acting and theater, and create that real connection and feeling, mostly feeling, which is the most important thing in art to me, rather than philosophy or thought or any kind of messages, and how to create that kind of feeling between actor and his character, between actor and himself, and create that to the audience. As I was keep talking and talking, you were talking about your experience in jazz music and how jazz musician would communicate with his instrument and music and other musician, in his band, and finally to the audience who listen to them. And then you brought that idea that if it's possible to apply all these exercises to the musician and see what would happen. And we did our researches, and we found we really couldn't find anybody else did that before, so we didn't have answer for it. Finally, you and I decided to do this production together, apply all these proof theater basic of Grotowski and my philosophy of Eastern theater to the Western theater, combine them together, but now bring the musician, who is you, in there. But now we're doing, we did more than 2 months rehearsal, and you still have more to do, but I want to know if, what have you realized so far doing this exercise and then go behind your drum and playing the music?
Well, let me start off by, it's a hell of a question. Let me start off by saying, I think in one of our earlier talks you mentioned in modern theater, or theater, that oftentimes sort of the opposite of poor theater would be where people would have fancy lights and fancy stage designs and props and costumes and sort of mechanical technique for the actor goes from here to here and says these lines and does this, and I guess sort of an academic approach or a formulaic approach to theater. And I think the same is true for music, in the way that music is taught nowadays. It's academic. It's sort of, especially with art music, with jazz, classical music has moved into the schools, and many musicians come up that way, going through formal education and through schools. And so the emphasis, I believe, because it's easier to teach this, but the emphasis is on the mechanics. So you have many musicians that think primarily about the technique of their instrument and the theory of the music. They think about the right notes and the right rhythms and forms and structures and all these sort of technical, mechanical aspects. Now, all of that stuff is important, I believe. You need those things. You need to have control of the music, control of your instrument. But I believe that all the great musicians have transcended that. John Coltrane, Ornette Coleman, Miles Davis, and jazz musicians have transcended that technique. They brought that excellent technique and control of the music, and they combined that with the more spiritual side of things, like you were talking a minute ago about Eastern theater. In fact, many jazz musicians, John Coltrane in particular, also studied many different genres of music. Of course, Western music, classical music, but also Indian music, Middle Eastern music, African music, and the related philosophies and spiritual traditions behind those, and brought that to his music. And to me, he is the ultimate combination of those things. He's got that power and emotion and feeling and intensity, and he's got complete virtuosic control of music and his instrument. So for me, that's what first really interested me in doing this production. Well, what would happen? That seems to be missing from the educational systems that we use. So many people don't talk about it, and yet the masters have it. The great players do get that, but most people, I would say most musicians get too wrapped up in the academic. So for me, to get back to your question about crying to your rehearsals, it's been an amazing experience. I mean, I've been able to watch, you know, the whole time we've been doing these performances, I've still been playing gigs and, you know, recording and active with music, and I've got to see how it starts to affect my music. For one thing, the connection between actors that we're working on, something as simple as eye contact, and just that in the rehearsals you've stressed so much and pushed us to really connect with each other on a deep level, and eye contact and you know, real deep connection. That's something that if you go see music, oftentimes everyone's got their eyes closed, which doesn't mean they're not connected, because music is of the ears. But that's something I started to notice, that oftentimes on the bandstand, the musicians can be sort of inwardly turned, like sort of turned away from the audience, and even sometimes turned away from each other, preoccupied with what they're doing, preoccupied with the technique, the mechanics, preoccupied with, where am I in the form? Is this the right note? Should I play that now? What, you know, more intellectual side. So that's something that's been really exciting for me, to come to a performance, and it's not something that I'm forcing. It's by going through this work, it's starting to happen where I'm just naturally more up and open and looking at people and trying to make that connection happen instead of just thinking about what am I playing on the drums. The other thing is the actual the feeling, the emotional side of finding this feeling. To do the same thing with the music again, what's the point of going up on the bandstand and playing a bunch of notes and playing fast things or patterns you've worked out or licks or whatever? The audience certainly doesn't care about that unless they're music students, and they can appreciate at least the technical side. The audience wants to be moved. They want to feel that energy. They want to be